We'd like to begin our June 15th regular meeting of the Board of County Commissioners for Union County. And we'll open our meeting with our invocation by Vice Chair Rushing.
Thank you. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us all here safely tonight and pray that you'll be with us as we do the business for the people of Union County. We also pray for the graduates from our high schools in the county and pray that they will have your blessing as they enter into the future, and hopefully the future will hold great things for them. We pray that you be with all the families in their travels. We know this is a vacation season. A lot of families are away, and please keep them safe and bring them back here to Union County safely. In your precious name we pray, amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next this evening, we'll have our service award and retiree recognition. And with 5 years of service, Heath Stewart with Administrative Services, Kevin Nussbaum with Community Services. With 15 years of service, Benjamin Baker with the Sheriff's Department, and John Young with the Sheriff's Office with 15 years also. And in May 2015, we had Michael Ates with the Sheriff's Office retire with 18 years of service, and Robert Rowland with the Sheriff's Department with 28 years of service. We appreciate the service and dedication of all these for their service to Union County. Next, we will have the introduction of the assistant to the county manager. So, Ms. Cotto, if you would like to recognize them.
Thank you, Chairman. Michael, do you mind coming up to the podium? He's trying to hide in the back. I can already see that. It's with pleasure I introduce to the board and to our listening public Michael James. He began employment with us last Monday, June 8th. Prior to working for Union County, he was the town manager in Rural Retreat, Virginia. He also has experience in North Carolina government. He has his Master's of Public Administration and Bachelor of Political Science, both from Appalachian State University. And he brings many skill sets to Union County, including project management, human resources, economic development, and planning and zoning. And Mike is originally from Jacksonville, North Carolina. So we have another native North Carolinian in the manager's office. So welcome.
I look forward to getting started. The staff has been great so far. I'm excited about the opportunity.
Thank you.
Glad to have you.
One of the things that I've been told since my term on the commission, how important the clerk is to the commissioners. And I can tell you, I was told how very important it was, and it even didn't scratch the surface. Ms. West does an exemplary job of supporting her. And one of the things I've told that the county was lacking was a deputy clerk. So Ms. West, if you'd like to introduce our new deputy clerk, please.
I'll be glad to. Sandra, if you come to the podium. In January of this year, the board authorized the addition of the position of deputy clerk to the county's pay and classification plan, with the funding associated with this position to be included in the 2015-2016 budget. We did interviews, and Sandra Farish has been selected. Many of you may know Sandra. She has worked in the Human Resources Department since 2013, is a human resources generalist, and she's helped with risk management and other personnel matters. And she will begin working in our office as of July 1st. She has a strong background in customer service and also in management, and she is very civic minded. She has a civic background, having participated in many community organizations, and we welcome you to the clerk's office.
Thank you very much. I look forward to working with you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Welcome, Sandra. Appreciate it. Next item, we have a public hearing for a rezoning request, RZ 2015-002 L1 to RA40. And don't believe we have any.
No, but Mr. Matthews, our Growth Management
Okay.
Director, would like to provide a few comments.
Okay, great.
This is your public hearing on this.
Yes.
For tonight. First off, I want to say about this time last year, planning, we actually put down the budget proposal for growth for Jeff, and I'm going to tell you, we're not going to damage his presentation tonight. So we're just going to make sure.
You're not going to close the lid of the laptop.
We are not going to damage his presentation like we did last year. So we'll get you out of here pretty quickly. As the chairman indicated, this is a rezoning request from light industrial LI to RA40. This property is located off of Army Road. Actually, if you can tell here, it's a good distance off of Army Road. It's these two parcels right here. There's I believe a house on this property here. I believe there may be a home on this one. The issue here is years ago, and we cannot find the reason why, but years and years ago, these portions of these two pieces of property were zoned light industrial. We really have no documentation what caused that to happen. You know, was there a business there, and then the county felt like that was the appropriate zoning for it? But right now, they're being used for residential purposes. That's what they are. And this came to light when the property owner came in, and they wanted to do a subdivision. They wanted to divide their property and to, I think, put another residence on there. And our rules now don't allow you to divide a property that has multiple zoning jurisdictions. You actually it actually has to be its own separate piece of property. And they couldn't really figure out why it was zoned light industrial, and neither could we. And so we recommended that the property just be rezoned to RA40. Everything around it is zoned RA40. That's a residential agricultural use. And so that's why we're here tonight. The property owner has agreed that this is probably the best option for them. There are two pieces of property, as the chairman indicated, and this was staff initiated. We felt like in discussing this with the property owner, it would not be appropriate to charge the property owner a fee for this, understanding that they weren't even aware this was zoned light industrial, and they weren't even using it for that purpose. So with their permission, we did a staff-initiated rezoning request on that. We do have the property owner's permission for this. So I will be happy to answer any questions you have. It's a pretty simple matter. They're approximately 1 acre in size on each one of those separate tracts. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Any question for the board? Thank you, Mr. Matthews.
Thank you.
And no one has signed up to speak at this public hearing? Is there anyone that didn't? Okay. All right, we'll close this public hearing for the rezoning. Next item is public hearing for the county manager's proposed FY 2016 operating and capital budget and manager's addendum to the proposed FY 2016 operating and capital budget. The public hearing has been held in accordance with North Carolina General Statutes 159-12B, which states before adopting the budget ordinance, the board shall hold a public hearing at time any persons who wish to be heard on the budget may appear. A brief presentation concerning the budget. Mr. Yates will present this, and then, yes, manager.
If I might, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I'd like to just make some opening remarks before I turn it over to Mr. Yates for his presentation and before you receive public input. Tonight's public hearing, as the chairman indicated, is a statutorily required hearing before the Board of County Commissioners actually takes formal vote on the overall county budget and the associated tax rates. Prior to this public hearing, the Board of County Commissioners did conduct a public hearing on May 18th, 2015 for the county, emergency medical services, and volunteer fire departments portion of the overall budget. The May 18th public hearing was in addition to 6 work sessions conducted on the budget, which began in February of this year. All of these meetings were open to the public and also live streamed over the internet. The addendum to the budget for funding of the Union County Public Schools was presented to the Board of County Commissioners on June 1st after receiving Union County Public Schools' request on May 15th of this year. My recommended budget reflects a 5.54% increase to the school's operating fund and is based upon our analysis of the written information provided to us by the school board as a joint meeting between the two boards was not held. The funding proposal is in keeping with the Board of County Commissioners' philosophy to provide local funding at amount generally greater than legally necessary to maintain a system of free and public schools as defined by state law and the State Board of Education policy in order to provide an opportunity for a sound basic education. The process taken was focused on providing a sustainable funding structure for the operations of the school and identified capital needs. My intent was to continue to fund a high-performance school system as we have in the past. Union County Public Schools significantly and consistently achieve some of the highest levels statewide. The 5.54% or $5 million increase over fiscal year 2015 operating budget is significant. In addition, I have recommended funding for specific capital needs, including roof projects, Benton Heights renovations, IT and transportation funding, and $1.3 million for security cameras replacement and upgrades. My recommendation does not include non-specified capital or $3.5 million approximately for capital soft costs for bond projects that have not been presented to or approved yet by the voters. I placed a higher priority on teacher supplements and pay increases for non-classified employees. I believe that this recommendation provides more than what is necessary to maintain a sound basic education. It is within the board's discretion to fund more than is necessary as a matter of local Board of County Commissioners policy. I will now turn the presentation over to Jeff Yates for more detail.
Thank you, Madam Manager. What we have for you tonight is a recap of kind of where we are in the budget process, the county's budget proposal, and then as Cindy mentioned, we're going to kind of walk through the school's recommendation, talk a little bit about what was requested, and then talk about some different components of that. So like I said, we want to recap the tentatively approved county budget and where it sits today, the Board of Education request, kind of how we worked through the qualitative analysis of the school's budget request, the current expense funding, the capital funding, the recommended schools ad valorem tax, and then other recommendations as part of that. As you mentioned in reading the introduction tonight, Mr. Chairman, this is your required budget public hearing. This is the last public hearing that's on, kind of, if I put my calendar up as we've seen a lot of time before, this is your last step in that process. Any point after tonight, you as a board may adopt the budget, and I think we have that tentatively scheduled for June 29th. So tonight's purpose is to kind of lay out for you and the public kind of where we are at this point, and then for you to receive that public comment and for consideration. So with that in mind, where are we with the county side of the equation? The tax purpose, as Cindy mentioned, we in our last meeting in May, our meeting in May, you tentatively approved the county tax rate for county operations as well as the countywide fire and EMS tax rates. I think it's important to note for those folks at home, when we say countywide fire and EMS tax, we're not referring to specifically the localized taxes, but this is what it requires, what would have been historically shown in the general fund, but what it requires countywide to provide supplements or subsidy to those volunteer fire departments. And then, as we mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about schools a little bit later, but your total countywide tax rate for these two components combined is about 31.93 cents. The Board of Education request, based on their funding request from the county, this doesn't comprise their total current expense fund, but what they're requesting for from the county side of the house. About $104.5 million items. They started off with a base funding of about $89 million, $89.1 million. That represents what you appropriated to them as part of the 14-15 year as the total. Then utility cost increases, charter school payments, and the list goes down. And I won't belabor it, and you can all read it. This will be available on our website tomorrow, but this kind of just mirrors kind of what the school board asked for, and I just wanted to show you where we started. Their capital requests included roofing projects, unspecified maintenance capital outlay, and this has kind of gone through a transition, if you will, in our discussions since early on. It's mostly referred to as emerging capital, those things that can occur in a year that they were unaware of, a boiler or something to that effect. So this was an amount of money that didn't have a specific project tied to it, but was for those needs as they could occur, what we refer to as contingent items. Other projects of about $2.5 million, which include any number of renovations, improvements to cafeterias, different projects across the entire school system. $1.9 million for the Benton Heights renovation, IP camera replacement of $1.3 million, IT and transportation funding of about $1 million, Benton Heights roofing project of about $543,000, and then unspecified kind of scope and market-driven adjustments. And again, this is what we'd refer to, and I'll mention a little bit later, as a contingent item. It didn't really have a specific project tied to it. Also included in the BOE request, and I think when we received their request on the 15th and then the subsequent meeting following that, we looked at really a couple of options for how to interpret that request. This is one way to look at it. There are multiple ways I believe you can look at it, and that's well documented in our addendum. But the BOE requests about another $158 million in bond projects, and the anticipation is that they will ask for those bond projects sometime in the fall, following the McKibben demographic study for consideration. I think that was the last discussion with the working group as well, was that at that time those bond projects would be considered, discussed, and then a recommendation and a request back to this body for bond projects. So the manager made no recommendation at this point as to what to do with the bond projects other than wait, see what McKibben says, what are the demographics of our county, how are they going to change, where are the costs going to be, and what projects then at that point should be considered. And I believe that the steps the Board of Education have to request that to you at this point. So the manager didn't opine or didn't make a recommendation either way on the bond projects. When we started looking at the full request, as you know, when we look at our budget, we kind of take the systematic approach and prioritization and kind of set out a philosophical basis and framework for how we're going to eat the elephant, if you will. So when we set out to kind of look at the school's budget, we set out some basic criteria or some guidelines as to how we were going to look at the request, keeping in mind that the charge is to fund a sound basic system, public school system, our system of free education. So when we sat down to look at that, we kind of said, we want to ensure that whatever funding structure we provide is fiscally sustainable. And when we say fiscally sustainable, what we're referring to is long-term sustainability of the service that is affordable to the public. We wanted to be sure we took care of capital maintenance. We wanted to have safe facilities for our students. We wanted to address funding shortfalls in federal and state funding as necessary. While the county has a policy for non-supplanting, I don't necessarily think we can extend that to the schools, because in some cases that loss of federal or state funding may actually come into play when fully considering the ramifications of that reduction. It may actually eat into that system of public education. Prioritizing the request within the physical constraints. What are those goals that the Board of Education has stated? What are your goals as a commission? And then funding priorities versus contingencies. And that became very important during the discussion of the capital, because as we talked about just a moment ago, the unspecified maintenance projects as well as the unspecified scope and market-driven adjustments really didn't have projects tied to them. And as Cindy mentioned in her opening remarks, early on, one of the goals that we felt really important was to address those teacher supplements. And we prioritized specifically those teacher supplements over the unspecified capital. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's really kind of the main crux of part of the discussion related to capital and the teacher supplements. So with that in mind, then we went back and we took out the CAFRs that we had from Union County Public Schools. And if you remember, the CAFRs are Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. It's their audited financial statements. And we saw kind of a trend when we looked back over years. And what this graph that you kind of have in front of you tells us, if you took the CAFR and you said, okay, how much was budgeted each year in current expense and how much was actually spent each year in current expense, you'd find this fairly significant disparity every year. And basically what that means is that the school system left budget appropriation on the table every year. And probably in 2014, if you were to do a per student based on the ADM at that point, they left about $169, or about 8% of that total budget, unspent. So in looking and projecting out in 2015, based on the information we've received all year long through our information, the information requests that you as a commission made at the start of last year, what we can see is the school system spends about, kind of in their peak months, about $7.5 million a year. So if we take that and project it to the end of the year, we think in 2015, they look like they're going to finish with just under $8 million. Now that's a projection, so we could be a little off on that. And we're waiting to get the May data to be able to take a look at that. But what this told us was that there's kind of this pattern, looking back over time, of underspending the budget. So we believe there's room in their budget to fit in some of these requests that they have. And that kind of played a pivotal role in trying to determine how to make that recommendation and how to come back to you as a commission and recommend to you which pieces you do and which pieces you don't do. So what are we recommending then for current expense? As Cindy mentioned, we're looking at about 5.5% increase in current expense funding. And that's almost $92 million. And here's where we would recommend that it would go. The state pay increases for the teachers about $385,000, and that'll be dependent. My understanding is this is based on the governor's budget, and it'll be based on whatever the final budget comes from the state. So this is an estimate at this point. About $378,000 for state benefit cost increases. We're recommending $5 million for teacher supplement increases. And the way that we kind of broke that out is we said, based on our analysis of over time of the school's financial statements, we believe that they can reprioritize some of their existing funding or that unspent funding every year to teacher supplements in conjunction with an additional $2.5 million from the county. And that's about halfway to where they requested in their total budget request, which was a fairly significant amount. It was over $11 million if you remember back to the earlier slide. So we feel like this is a really strong move toward funding teacher supplements. We looked at $868,000 for performance pay for non-certified employees, as Cindy mentioned, going to those non-teaching positions, the janitors, the kitchen staff, those folks. About $693,000 for increased utilities. This is a little bit down from what the schools requested. And in the information we received and one of our requests from the schools, they referred to what the county did as far as utilities. So what we did in this case is we provided them the same cost increase we provided on the county side. So this matches exactly what we're doing with the county utilities and what our estimates are. And in checking with the utilities board and the different folks around, we believe we're right on target, if not maybe even a little bit over and our budget over what the utility increases are. So we felt like a little over 6.5% was appropriate. And then beyond that, about $85 million, $84.5 million for those other expenditures. And if you remember, those kind of ranged from increased enrollment at the charter schools. We believe that the original request for driver's ed will be taken care of through the state budget process and those things. And based on our analysis, again, going back of where they budget versus where they actually spend to, we believe there's plenty of space within their budget to be able to fit those other items in. And I think it's important to note that this current funding is entirely ongoing. There is no part of the current expense funding that is one-time in nature. So when we ask you to adopt the tax rate in a couple of weeks, that is the ongoing portion. So we're not using one-time money for ongoing operations. And I've heard that kind of comment publicly from different folks. And I think it's important to know that we don't believe that's sustainable, and we wouldn't recommend to you a one-time source for ongoing issues. As mentioned, we had the session law. It's now been repealed. But just for comparative purposes, the current expense funding provided to you in this recommendation is about $3 million, or a little bit over 3% more than what would have been provided under the session law. So we feel like it's a balanced approach, and that we kind of really addressed a lot of those needs as stated by the public schools, while ensuring that we kind of kept that tax rate at a reasonable level. And I think it's important to note, as Cindy mentioned, I think the conversation's gotten a little askew, because we do have a high-performing school system. And I'm not going to go through all of these items, but look at graduation rate, over 92%. That's at the top in the state. Average SAT scores, average ACT proficiency, end-of-grade testing, we're well above where everyone else is in the state. So I think it's hard to argue that you as a commission have underfunded schools over time. And I think in this case, what the BOCC has decided to do historically, and even in this recommendation, what the manager is recommending to you, is more than what is necessary to provide for that basic level of education. I think it goes well above and beyond, and I think your system, based on what we see, and these are just some of the metrics, you can go and pull the remainder from the state, and at least in 2013-14, what we see is a really high-performance school system. And the manager's recommendation to you tonight, I believe, continues that process and continues that excellence. Some other questions that I think just needed to be addressed that we've kind of heard off and on is that the county manager is required to provide this recommendation to you by general statute. So the concept, this is the first time that she's ever made a recommendation, or that it's new for the manager to make a recommendation on public schools funding, is kind of is not correct. The charter school funding, we understand from the schools how that number is derived as far as how they present that or how they provide that to the charter school. I think the question from staff that we've asked and at times we don't feel like I've gotten a satisfactory answer to is, how come or why is it that when you move 1,000 students out of the school system, there's not efficiency gain from moving 1,000 students out of the school system, and why that's always reflected as increased cost to the school system and not as savings? Because if you really think about it, 1,000 students is a school's worth of kids moving them out of the school system. So you would think is if there's going to be increased cost or increases in charter school enrollment, that there would be corresponding reductions in cost, because they're no longer required to educate that student sitting in that seat. That student is now gone somewhere else. And I think it's important to note also that there's been a lot of conversation going back several years about what the county has in fund balance. I don't think funding for UCPS is based on what the county has in fund balance. I think what it is based on is what you as a board determine is necessary for them to operate their schools, and what you as a board determine what you're going to give above and beyond that. That is a policy decision for you as the board. It's not about what you have in the bank or in your fund balance. And I think that's an important factor, and I think a lot of times we get lost in that conversation. A lot of questions come up as to, well, what does the county have in fund balance? What does the county have in fund balance? It doesn't really matter. In this discussion, it's what you as a board, as a matter of policy, determine above that base level of service that you're going to provide to them. Per pupil expenditure, we get a lot of times, and I've seen this in multiple presentations from the schools, and I could put our per pupil expenditure at the local level up and we'd be number 38. The schools will tell you we're in the high, we're in the 100, 112, in that range of where we are in total. I don't think per pupil spending is an appropriate metric, because if you were to look who the highest per pupil spending school districts are, they're some of the lowest performing school districts in the state. And I don't think we want necessarily to have that level of performance. I think it matters what we do here in Union County, and on a per pupil basis, the metric and comparison just doesn't compare. And students across socioeconomic classes and geographic locations perform differently. And in Union County, our system is excellent as it sits, regardless of where we are on a per pupil basis. So I think that per pupil metric is the incorrect metric to compare against. The 5-year average turnover rate, and this kind of came about as we started looking at, we were asked, or you as a board were asked to fund teacher supplements, and the comment was made, well, the school system is essentially hemorrhaging teachers to Mecklenburg, to South Carolina and those areas. And so we set out to kind of look at it factually, because I think there's a lot of emotion involved, and a lot of folks, we all want to pay our teachers the best we can for what they do. But I think we have to look at the facts of the matter. And a 5-year average turnover rate, we're just about the state average. We're within 2/10 of the state average on a 5-year basis. And if you were to kind of look at, and on this slide, going back even to 2013-14, we're well below what the state average is. We're about 4% below in teacher turnover. And if you were to look and compare us to Mecklenburg in that same 5-year window, we're actually 1.5%, just under 1.5% less in teacher turnover than where Mecklenburg's at. So the concept that we are hemorrhaging teachers at a higher rate than anyone else, than teachers are leaving the profession, teachers going anywhere else, I think it's kind of a misnomer. So I think in looking at the supplements for teachers, that kind of prompted our discussion and looking at, while we do want to have the best and retain the best, we're not losing teachers at any higher rate than any other school system in the area. And to compare to South Carolina, who has a totally different pay structure, totally different school systems, and in fact, a lot of the school systems we were provided as support for the teacher supplements were small school systems. It's just not comparable. So we believe that this recommendation, giving $5 million increase in supplements, while we're not hemorrhaging teachers, will help to retain the best and the most qualified teachers in that process. And I think it's important also, we've heard a lot about growth and kind of where the county is going in growth. And I think it's important to note that we are seeing limited growth. We see limited growth into the future. And we've talked to Brian about this and kind of where he sees, and it's his job to watch permits and kind of keep its pulse on growth in the county. And we don't see a huge boom going on in Union County. We see kind of steady growth over time. And even in talking to the demographer, the same demographer that does the schools analysis, Dr. McKibben, he kind of even goes lower than we do in a lot of his estimates. So the county is not having this boom bust cycle like folks out there think we are. And I think that's evidenced when you start looking at new single family residential unit building permits. And this is an indicator then of new houses essentially. Recognizing we don't have a lot of apartment complexes going in right now. But you can see we kind of hit our peak in 2013 and we're kind of trailing off through our estimated 2015 numbers. And I think what you see is that that's reflective of over 2010, 2011, 2012, during the economic downturn, people were having a harder time getting mortgages and so forth. So you kind of saw this pent up demand. So in 13, which would be the 12, 13, 13, 14 fiscal year, we saw this incredible inventory of stock homes and space, and kind of the market forces reached a point where folks could afford buy those houses because the prices came down because of an increase in stock. The ability of people to borrow money came up. We saw a fledgling recovery. So I think you saw this high growth, a kind of a peak demand period. And I would argue that 2013 was more of a catch-up year than it was representative of a year where we saw a new sustained high level of growth. And I think that's why you saw that spike in 2013 and then that decline going in from 13, 14, and 15. And I think that that's important because what we're talking about when we start to look at that bond package, if that comes back to you as a commission in the fall, is really what does that mean then to schools? Is it pocketed growth? Are those 1,000 homes a year, where are they going to go? Are they going to go in the north? Are they going to go to the south, southwest, southeast? And I think that's really the discussion, and that's what we're really waiting to see from the demographic analysis that Dr. McKibben's going to do. And when he drills down further into the demographics, is where is that growth going to be? But to make a blanket statement that we're having out of control growth and that we're having this huge growth in the county, the numbers just don't bear that out. And I know it's counterintuitive to the anecdotal. When you're driving around, you do see houses coming out of the ground, and we are seeing about 1,000 houses. But We're not seeing this rampant growth as we saw going through the 2000s when we were having to add schools every year. So moving on to the recommended capital, there's kind of two pieces that we looked at in the recommended capital. First was that capital ongoing. So this bill puts into play enough tax rate in the recommendation to cover these three components: the roofing projects, the other schools projects, which are structural, mechanical, and site improvements, and then technology and transportation for about $13.5 million. And it's important because the way that we're recommending, and I'll get to this in a second, but we're recommending that you would adopt the roofing projects on a per school basis, kind of like we did with our other roofing projects, and that then the other projects, that about $2.5 million, be a single pot of money for schools to address those miscellaneous other projects that they listed. And there are a lot of little ones. So we're trying to be balanced in our approach from an administrative burden to both the schools as well as our staff, and provide them a little bit of flexibility in those other projects. And then one-time capital projects, we're looking at the Benton Heights renovations and then the IP security cameras. And I want to say one thing on the IP security cameras. We're recommending about $1.3 million for security cameras, and it's one project. So where UCPS as a board determines, as a matter of policy, to put cameras is up to the school board. This $1.3 million provides all the money requested in that process. So I think that's important to note, that we're trying to ensure the safety of the students through this request. And then the Benton Heights renovations, that's the full request that they made, about $1.9 million for Benton Heights renovations. And what you don't see is those other projects, they were kind of undefined. And I think it's important because those contingent projects, the $2 million in emerging capital needs, the $616,000 in scope creep, and then the $544,000 for the Benton Heights roof replacement, we're proposing that instead of allocating money to those projects and not to teachers, we're suggesting that we allow the same process we used on the roofing projects for the manager to be able to transfer up to 10% between projects, and more than 10% would come back to you as a board, to allow schools the flexibility to meet those emerging needs as they come up. And in our discussions with Karen Malonzi as well at the School of Government, what we've heard from her is that in a case where there is a capital need, the schools have the ability to transfer from even their operating funds, going back all the way back to that unspent money, to be able to meet those needs on an emergency basis. So we feel like there's plenty of ability to be flexible in that process, such that we don't take what I always refer to in our budget process as valuable budget real estate for contingent items. And in committing to wanting to move that money to teacher supplements versus unknown items, I think it's a big step forward. So when you kind of pull it all together, this is what it looks like. Your school's tax rate will provide about $105.4 million. One-time sources, and when we say one-time sources, that's the smoothing reserve money that you as a commission last year approved a little bit higher tax rate so that this year's tax rate wouldn't have to be as high. So we're going to use that as we recommended last year. And then fund balance from the school's budgetary fund. And what that represents then, going back, is that those one-time capital projects. You see the $3.2 million and it's $3.2 million. So that's really the only one-time in nature funding. But recognizing that, as has been pointed out, we do at times experience increased revenue from our property taxes. What we'll do is evaluate those extra projects of that $3.2 million on an annual basis during the budget process, and kind of use what's left in that fund each year based on the overcollection. And the current expense, you can see almost $92 million. That's an increase of about 5.5%. The $12 million for ongoing renewal and replacement, $12.5 million. One-time capital, 3.2 as I mentioned earlier, and then IT and transportation projects of about $1 million. So when you pull the whole recommendation down, it's about 1.8% over last year for a tax rate of about 45.7, just a little bit over 45.7 cents. And I think it's really important to note, if you're using the benchmark of the session law, which is no longer in effect, what you really see is we are right on where that would have put us. We're at 99.8%. It's right around $200,000 difference. So, as the chairman's pointed out, that's kind of a rounding error when you start talking about tax rates and so forth. And I think that it's important to note that there is also that ongoing funding for capital. So we really felt like we've addressed, based on our analysis of the school's needs, what that ongoing need is and what that ongoing requirement is. Our other recommendations, as I talked about earlier, appropriation of current expense, current expense down to the function level. And with Dan Karpinski's help in the schools, we've put that together for you. It's in your ordinance package tonight, just kind of, so you can see the draft ordinance. A 10% flexibility for them for transfers between those function codes. Appropriation of capital funding at the project level, going back to how we do the roofs, the roofing projects as we had in that emergency appropriation. We want to review those brick and mortar projects when the latest demographic report is complete. I think it's important to note that based on that demographic report, where we will be focusing in on, I believe that the kind of the challenge in that then is how you solve permanent issues with permanent solutions, and really those temporary issues, where are those temporarily stressed areas going to be in your school system with temporary solutions? Because you don't want to create permanent capacity where you don't need permanent capacity, because that's a 20-year commitment to the taxpayer, when we could take on some temporary solutions and some temporary goals to address them in the near future and get them to what that permanent normal is. And then we want to continue the reporting requirements. We've been using those, and if you've been following your monthly reports, all that information's been placed regularly in your reports, as well as placed on our website, and I think it's been useful for the public and transparency purposes. So with that, where does that leave us in total ad valorem taxes? So based on all three tax rates, you're looking at an all-in tax rate of 77.65 cents, which doesn't mean a whole lot until you kind of apply it to an average taxpayer. If you're looking at the average taxpayer, and there's no one average, so these are just kind of about in the middle. If you had a home value of $208,400 in 2015, based on what we did in countywide in our reval, your house is worth about $200,000 now. Your motor vehicle, $9,900 last year, is depreciated value this year that you're taxed on is about $9,500. So with those factors, if you compare the two tax rates, you're actually going to see a slight reduction in your tax bill. It's not huge. It's about $36, but it's not an increase to your taxes either. So we feel like that this recommendation really does meet the needs for the school system, as well as meet the needs for the county, for the operating. And we talked about the sustainability on the county side and those other things. So with that, you can continue to see the information on our website. We have our email address, Ask the County Manager. We've updated the domain name, so it's our new domain name, and then public comment at unioncounty.nc.gov. I can tell you to date that we haven't seen any. I haven't received any at the Ask our public comment. Have you received any at the Ask the Manager?
No.
Okay, so we do get some views of our budget document. It's out there for the world to see, as well as this recommendation or this presentation. The manager's addendum's already out there. This will all be posted tomorrow for everyone to see, as well as the budget ordinance. So with that, Commissioner, I give it back to you for the public hearing.
Okay, appreciate it. We've had no one to sign up for public comments. However, I've noticed several people have joined us after the 7 p.m. startup. Is there anyone that would like to speak in this public hearing? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Nora Bass. My daughter Haley is 12 years old. She is an amazing child with a glowing personality and explosive curiosity. She has Down syndrome, ADHD, and is nonverbal. She can say 1 to 2 words at a time. Her memory is very short. She has behavior issues due to her disabilities, not wanting to follow directions and trouble staying in her seat. She has never been aggressive in the past. She's always loved going to school, but started saying every morning, "No go, stay home." As active as my daughter is, she has never come home with several unexplained marks except in 2011 and now in 2015. We are facing this again. On April the 20th, there was an incident at the school concerning a mark on my daughter. And on April 22nd, she came home from school with several marks and bruises on her upper body and arms. My child told me on video who did this, and I took pictures and reported it to the school and called the police to file a report. But yet we don't have cameras in special needs classrooms. Our nonverbal children don't have a voice. I do know that a weighted vest was put on my daughter, and she backed herself into a corner, refusing to come out, and said, "Mom, Mom, home, home." She was really scared. The school district is investigating this, and as much as I hate to say it, I fear the same results. Not enough evidence. Our children with disabilities, verbal and nonverbal, are being heard all over the United States, not just in North Carolina. Cameras are a must. Our kids need to have a voice. Cameras should also be in the classrooms to deter violence against staff and students, accusations concerning abuse, harassment, theft, bullying, sexual assaults. Cameras would shorten the time on investigations into accusations in all matters. Legal charges would be filed and the abusers would be prosecuted. Without cameras, our nonverbal children will continue to be manhandled and injured and get no justice. No, not one more child should have to go through this without being able to get justice. And the only way for a nonverbal child to get justice is cameras with audio. Safety for a child should come first. Imagine being that child that is abused, but can't tell the who or the how. I have to be my daughter's voice. We can't help our kids without your help. The way I see it, it's a win-win situation for the school to comply for the safety of our kids and their staff. And I ask you please to make funds available to install the cameras in special needs classrooms so that our children may be kept safe. I have started a petition, required cameras in special education classrooms. We're up to 1,064 signatures. As you can see, this is a huge problem that must be addressed now. Petition can be found at change.org in the search area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bass. Is there anyone else that didn't get an opportunity to speak? You see some? Okay, do you see one? I'm sorry, come on.
Good evening. My name is Amy Oster, and this is my son, Andrew. He is 7 years old, and he's nonverbal. We are coming to you tonight to address the safety of special education classrooms here in Union County Public Schools. As a parent, imagine if your child was unable to come home and tell you anything about their day at school. Imagine your child being unable to tell you if they were hurt in any way and how it happened. Imagine your child unable to tell you anything that was said to them at school that day. Imagine your child's classmates unable to tell you anything about your child's experience at school. This is a reality for many parents of children in these special needs classrooms. The parents are completely dependent upon staff to be completely honest and accurate about their child's experience at school, and unfortunately, this doesn't always happen. In 2012, I put a digital recorder on Andrew so he would have a voice to tell me what his day was like at school, because the staff was not being honest. I couldn't simply go to teachers or administrators with my concerns due to fears of retaliation behind closed doors. On the recorder that day, Andrew, along with his classmates, were ridiculed, mocked, yelled at, berated, and physically forced by the teacher and aide. The staff in school had failed to keep him safe and violated my trust. I soon realized that this was not an isolated incident. After speaking with parents and some previous UCPS employees, this is a problem with some of these special education classrooms. It's 2015, and I'm still receiving calls from parents with concerns in some of these classrooms. By placing cameras in these classrooms, it would give these children a voice. These cameras would show what did or did not take place. Cameras would protect both students and staff. The cameras would clear anyone from false accusations. With many of these children not having the ability to speak for themselves, they do not have the same security and protection as their non-disabled peers. When the subject of cameras in the classroom is mentioned, many will use legal or privacy concerns. The Fourth Amendment protects our privacy in places of expected privacy. The U.S. Supreme Court has already declared There is no expectation of privacy in the public school except locker rooms or restrooms. There are no state or federal laws that would prevent cameras from being placed in the special needs classrooms, not even the federal FERPA laws. Currently, there are some school districts throughout the U.S. with cameras in special needs classrooms. After some districts in Texas had implemented them, the state has now recently passed a bill to mandate them in all special education classrooms. In 2003, the Biloxi Public Schools in Mississippi placed cameras in all 500 of their classrooms with great success. We should not be asking ourselves, should we have cameras in special needs classrooms? We should be asking ourselves, why don't we have cameras in special needs classrooms? I'm asking UCPS and Union County to come together to protect our most vulnerable children in this county. I would like to ask Union County, is funding available in the budget for UCPS to place these cameras in the special needs classrooms? And I'm also asking the county to request UCPS to appropriate the funding under security cameras for them to be placed in the special needs classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oyster. Any others? Seeing no others, I will close this public hearing. Next, we have informal comments, and we have two signed up, Ms. Bass and Ms. Oyster. I assume that this was the opportunity. Thank you very much for sharing with us this evening. I'll also ask if there's any others that want to make public comments that didn't have an opportunity to sign. Okay. Next, we'll move on to addition, deletions, and adoption to the agenda. Commissioners, we had several things added to our packet. One was an item for designated a voting delegate and alternate to the 2015 annual NACO conference to be held in Mecklenburg County. I'd like to ask that be added to the end of our consent agenda. And I think the clerk passed out an amendment to item 5A5. If you'll make note of that, please, when your consideration for the consent agenda. Is there any other additions, deletions, or adoptions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pull off item 4 for discussion, please.
Okay. And I assume we're moving on to the consent agenda. This was,
Yes.
okay. All right, item 4, to remove that. Okay. Any additional?
Motion to approve. Agenda is amended.
Okay, any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, all approve, none. Disapprove, none. Okay. Then have a vote.
Motion to approve consent.
Consent agenda? I remembered this time, Frank. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? None. You might make your plane, Lance. You might make your plane.
I might.
We have no old business on the agenda. New business. The consideration of the rezoning request RZ 2015-02 L1 to RA40 as held in our public hearing earlier. The request to rezone 2 acres of property consisting of portions of 2 tax parcels under different ownership. Do we have a motion for acceptance? Vice Chair?
Motion to approve the rezoning request of RZ 2015-02 from light industrial to RA40 and adopt the applicable consistency statement.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? None. Next, we'll move on to appointments to boards and committee. Our first would be Juvenile Crime Prevention Council. The terms of the following members of the Juvenile Crime Convention Council expire on June 30th, 2015. Chief District Judge or designee, Judge Tripp Helms currently serves in this position, has applied for reappointment. And let's take them one at a time. Any discussion on Judge Helms? All in favor for his reappointment? Aye. All opposed, none. Then next, the county manager or designee position is currently vacant, and a motion to appoint Michael James, assistant to the county manager, is requested to fill this position. Any discussion?
Move to appoint Mr. James.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? None. Thank you.
Three reappointments.
Hmm?
We're gonna do the three reappointments now.
There was only two in that, as I understood. Did I read it?
These
There were
three
three
right here.
people that,
There's 3 county commission appointees.
oh.
I move to appoint
apologize.
Rachel Patton, Angie Horn, and Emily Westover.
Well, thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. When I read that as the two, and I apologize for that. Won't be the last mistake I make. Nursing Home Advisory Committee. There are at least 6 vacancies on the Nursing Home Advisory Committee. Applications have been received from the following to serve on the Nursing Home Advisory Committee.
Motion to approve Anna Welsh and Ruth Cox.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, sir. Region F Aging Advisory Committee. There are vacancies on the Region F Advisory Committees as follows. Regular member, term expires June 30th, 2015, a new term. Regular member, unexpired term, June 30th, 2016. Member currently serving has moved from Union County. Patricia Kinley is currently serving as an alternate. Her term expires June 30. Ms. Kinley is eligible for appointment of the regular term. And Catherine Tomeski is applying to fill the unexpired term of the regular member who expires on June 30th, excuse me.
Motion
Commissioner
to
Akins.
approve Patricia Kinley and Kathleen Demansky.
Okay. Any further discussion? Now, question, Commissioner Akins.
Yes, sir.
One's a alternate?
I'll do Patricia Kinley as the appointment to the regular member term, full term, and Ms. Demansky will fill the unexpired term of the regular member,
Okay,
expiring June 30, 2016.
okay. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? None. Agricultural Advisory Board. 3 terms of the Agricultural Advisory Board expire June 2015. Gerald Magnum and James Howie have applied for reappointment.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mangum and Mr. Howie have served faithfully on that board, and I would recommend them both for reappointment.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor for Mr. Magnum and Mr. Howie?
Aye.
All opposed, none. Industrial Facilities and Pollution Control Financing Authority. Vacancies exist on the Industrial Facilities and Pollution Control Financing Authority as follows. 2 members whose terms have expired and 1 expired term expires in May 2016. Philip Scott Morris has applied to serve on the authority.
Move that we appoint Philip Scott Morris to serve on the authority for the Industrial Facilities and Pollution Control Financing Authority.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? None. County Manager?
I have no comments this evening.
Vice Chair Rushing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Keep it brief. Congratulations again to all of our high school seniors in graduating, and I know your daughter graduated and is heading to Ole Miss, right? So just congratulations again to all our students, and what a wonderful job their schools do. And that'll be all.
Okay, Commissioner Lance Simpson.
Just, again, congratulations to all the graduates. Good luck in their future careers. Wish everyone the very best. Appreciate the people who spoke tonight. There's some concerned parents out there, so I look forward to hearing from them. And I know that for myself, I believe that they need to be helped, and I'm fully in support of that. I cannot speak for the board, but I speak as an individual that I believe we need to protect the kids.
Okay, Commissioner Akmus,
I have no comments this evening.
Commissioner Simpson.
No comments.
And I thank for those that came to speak tonight on a very critical subject. Mr. Yates, thank you very much for your presentation and our understanding of the budget.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
My apologies for interrupting, but I believe that Commissioner Simpson removed an item from the consent agenda. Any member is allowed to remove an item from the consent agenda, but not from the entire agenda. That has to be voted on by the board. I just wanted to make that clear. I wasn't clear exactly. I'm not sure. I may have missed it. Did we consider that item or not?
No, we didn't.
No, we didn't. And consider it as for discussion or to vote to pull it as Commissioner Simpson.
I may have misunderstood Commissioner Simpson, but any commissioner by your rules may remove an item from the consent agenda to the regular agenda, and I thought that's what had been done.
Okay.
It requires a vote of the board to remove it from the agenda, the regular agenda itself.
Okay. How did you,
I would move that we remove it from the current agenda for tonight.
for tonight? For discussion at a later date?
Discussion at a later date.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Again, thank you very much. Welcome, Michael. We're glad to have you with us. And I see Sandra has had her 16-year-old daughter with her, and she slipped out to get them back home. So we look forward to both of you joining our team. You're already here. Sandra will be here, and a real asset for the commissioners. And with that, move that we close. Adjourn this evening. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Jeff.